provide a platform for presenting opposing views on issues, but do it in a civil, respectful way, that we're providing a model for the students in the community that we don't have to be divisive and attack one another. We can just base it on facts and let people arrive at their own conclusions.
I would say it's important as a high schooler to go to this because it's impactful and it'll teach you what it's like to have a conversation with either side that you disagree with.
I think that it definitely reminds us that we can have discussions about things that we may disagree on in a way that's respectful and constructive to finding answers to some of our problems.
3, 2, 1.
One in 4 of us has been touched in some way by mental illness, so you're not alone. This community is incredibly impressive because I really get a sense here that you care about your own, and not only care about it, but you're making yourself aware of what's going on and then trying to do something about it.
Really cool because, you know, I feel very fortunate to live in New Albany and have the New Albany Community Foundation right here, you know, arranging for these types of events. But I think it's also really important that the foundation extended that opportunity to all sorts of different schools in Central Ohio. And I think that's something we should take a lot of value in. I think that was a really, really thoughtful thing for them to do because it expanded the discourse, you know, not only to New Albany, but the Central Ohio area.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the New Albany Lecture Series. I'm Craig Moore, president of the New Albany Community Foundation. Tonight, we kick off the 9th season of the lecture series with a continuation of our conversations on social justice. We're honored to have Pulitzer Prize-winning author Isabel Wilkerson and as our featured speaker tonight. An important part of our mission as a foundation and through our lecture series is to promote lifelong learning, civil discourse, and a greater understanding on a variety of important issues. We're glad that you've joined us. Like all of you, we've adapted to the new normal caused by COVID. Offering free virtual programs has helped us reach even more people. So we were particularly grateful to reach through our sponsors for helping make these programs possible. Future programs. We also offer a link to submit questions during the presentation and a post-event survey. Before we begin, I'd like to recognize our generous season sponsors: Abercrombie & Fitch, American Electric Power Foundation, Battelle, CAS, the Conway Charitable Lead Annuity Trust, Beatrice Wolper trustee, Ohio Health, and Turner Construction. And thank you to the sponsors for tonight's program: Bath and Body Works, Discover, Easton Community Foundation, Encova, and Kroger. Now let's begin. The foundation established a social justice advisory group to help us bring people together and to promote greater understanding on this topic. Tonight, we continue the discussion with Isabelle Wilkerson, the author of The Warmth of Other Suns and Caste, The Origins of Our Discontents, interviewed by Kerry Charles. Please note that the recording of this program is prohibited. Before Ms. Wilkerson joins us, I want to introduce you to Kerry Charles, an Emmy Award-winning weeknight anchor for NBC4. Kerry grew up in Central Ohio and graduated from Lyndon McKinley High School before attending the University of Cincinnati. He gives back to the community through volunteering with many local organizations that focus on social justice, and he uses his platform to help improve the lives of others. As an active member of our community, His participation tonight is especially meaningful. Hello, Kerry, and thanks for joining us tonight. The community has been looking forward to this program, and we really appreciate you being with us. Now I'll turn it over to you to begin our discussion.
Well, Craig, I appreciate it so much. Thank you so much for having me. Good evening to you, everyone. I've been looking forward to being here with you all as well, and have the proud pleasure tonight to introduce the one and only Isabelle Wilkerson. Good to see you tonight.
Great to be with you.
Welcome to Central Ohio in this world that we're in right now of all of this virtual technology, and as we are shifting and getting comfortable here in this world of COVID. Hopefully we can be in the same room sooner than later. You know, our audience is familiar with you, knows your name, familiar with your works, knows you as a Pulitzer Prize winning author and recipient of the National Humanities Medal, but your books, they have been guiding a number of conversations through the years, generating a lot of dialogue. So as you dive into your work and you begin talking about your work, your research and all of that, I want you to begin focusing on Caste in particular. This book right here is getting a lot of praise.
Yes, it's been out for about a year, and I've been stunned and very honored at the extent of its reach. It spent over a year on the New York Times bestseller list, so it's been quite an experience.
For sure, for sure. Well, we're excited. I have, as you know, as a journalist, I have notes and papers scattered about, so I'll be taking notes. I'm sure our friends watching will be tuned in and taking notes, and we'll see you on the other side.
Thank you. Well, it is such an honor to be with you this evening, especially given the role of Ohio in the work that I did for The Warmth of the Suns. You know, I was on the book tour for The Warmth of the Suns for about 10 years, and it was shut down essentially when all of us essentially came to a halt because of COVID. But everywhere I went, I always spoke of Ohio, and particularly because of the inspiring story of Jesse Owens and how his family made the journey from Alabama to the Ohio State University, and to be able to qualify for the Olympics, where he set records with the gold medals. We might not know his name, not because he didn't have the talent, but because he would not have had the opportunity that arose as a result of the Great Migration and of his family's journey to Ohio. So I mention him almost every time when I'm speaking about The Warmth of the Suns. It's such an honor to be with you, and I so wish that I could be there in person, that we could all be together in person, because I've spent so much time in Ohio through the years. But here we are meeting virtually. In the midst of the ravages of climate change. We've seen New York underwater, New Orleans struck by wind and hurricane, and California on fire, and now this oil spill off the coast of Orange County. Just incredible, the things that are happening to our planet and to our species. We're in the midst of political upheaval and a global pandemic that continues to threaten us as the virus mutates faster than we can keep up with it. Worsened by and laying bare the deep divide that threatens democracy itself. In recent times, it's not been unusual to hear something along the lines of, from people who have been trying to process what we're experiencing in this country, by saying something along the lines of, "This is not my country," or "I don't recognize my country," or "This is not what America stands for." And every time I hear that sentiment, that well-meaning, heartfelt sentiment, I am reminded that not enough of us know our country's true history. Because if we knew our country's true history, we would be recognizing that our country in some ways is like a patient with a pre-existing condition like heart disease. And if a patient who has heart disease happens to have a heart attack, you might be alarmed, you might be upset, you might be moved to action. But you would not be surprised if a heart patient without intervention or treatment had a heart attack. And thus, that means that this is a way of understanding the ways in which we have inherited this pre-existing condition in our country, which has yet to truly be addressed. The book that brought you to my attention, or me to your attention, is a book that I did not wish to write, but that demanded to be written, that called to me to be written. And shortly after it was released, all of us having to communicate through this veil of technology of a virtual world, I went out on a virtual book tour. And one of the earliest events, someone said to me, truly heartfelt and truly from the depths of his sense of concern, he said that, we've been through so much as a country. We are in the midst of, at that time, a fraught political presidential campaign. We are in the midst of a global pandemic. We were, at that time, the person said, in the midst of the uprisings and upheavals over the killing of George Floyd. We've been through so much as a country. And then in August, you dropped Caste on us. And so I said back to him, just as good-naturedly as he had said to me, I said, I did not drop Caste on anyone. Caste is with us whether we choose to see it or not. Caste is with us whether we recognize it or not. It is essentially it is the basis of and the infrastructure of our divisions, the divisions that we have inherited. Caste is with us whether we acknowledge it or see it or not. Here we are in the middle of the second year of this global pandemic, and with the latest mutation surging and with others forming in the wings, here we are having to come to terms with the consequences of hierarchy and caste, as shown through the pandemic and how it has moved through our country. And we're having to come to grips with and somehow find a way to comprehend the grimmest of distinctions that we as a nation are facing. And that is that the United States, the richest nation in the world and the most technologically advanced in the world, leads the world in this grim distinction. And that is that we have now surpassed 700,000 Americans who've lost their lives to COVID-19. We have, throughout this pandemic, sadly, we have led much of the world in the number of recorded deaths. We have led even the second ranked country, India, in the number of COVID cases that have taken over and so beset that country as well as ours. We know that we also have the lowest vaccination rate in the G7. Our numbers, the numbers for the United States related to COVID, are not in line with our peer nations, but in fact with the developing world. How is it that two very, very different countries, the United States and India, the oldest democracy in the world and the largest democracy, are being stricken with these numbers? One has the world's oldest caste system and the other has a less recognized one. A caste system, through its social controls, stigma and structure and other pillars of caste, embeds and foments division. It programs people into believing that they have no stake in the well-being of those that they have been told are beneath them, those that they are told are unworthy, undeserving. It makes for a less magnanimous society, a built-in us versus them distance between groups. It affects policy, it affects how people vote, it affects where people choose to live and where they send their children to school. It affects who they choose to hire, who they choose to promote, who they choose to grant mortgages to. It affects how and where the country invests or disinvests. There are many reasons why we find ourselves in the current crisis, but caste and the division that it sows is surely one of them, and it is literally costing lives. Caste is not a word that's often applied to the United States, and yet Dr. Martin Luther King came to the realization of the applicability of this phenomenon, of this concept, in better understanding our own country. And he came to this recognition in the winter of 1959, when he made a historic trip to India. And that trip to India was made as a result of his desire to want to be connected to or to understand the origins of the nonviolent protest philosophy of Mohandas Gandhi. to the country that he'd always wanted to go to in 1959. He, upon arrival, was greeted as a visiting dignitary because it turned out that the people of India had been paying a close attention to the protest movement, the liberation movement of Black people in the United States. So everywhere he went, people asked him for his autograph, people recognized him on the street. He was greeted as a visiting dignitary. He had dinner with the Prime Minister, a very good trip. While he was there, he wanted to visit with people who were then known as untouchables, now known as Dalits. And so he made a trip to the southern part of India in order to visit with the school that was populated by students who were from families then known as untouchables. And upon arrival, the principal was so excited to greet Dr. King. He gathered the students together and he brought Dr. King out and he said to the students, he said, "Young people, I wish to introduce you to a fellow untouchable from the United States of America." When Dr. King heard that language applied to him, he first bristled at it. He was actually quite peeved. He didn't see himself in that way. He didn't see how and why they would place him in that kind of a position or assume that he would be in that position. He did not see himself low caste. He did not see himself in a caste system. He did not see himself as an untouchable. And then he thought about it. He thought about what was at that moment 20 million Black people in the United States, the majority of whom were being prohibited from the body politic, prohibited from being able to vote, prohibited from being able to go to the schools of their choice, prohibited from being able to go to school with people who did not look like them, prohibited in the occupations that they could hold, prohibited as to where they could live, prohibited in every sphere of their lives, and that their efforts to be recognized as citizens were being met with tremendous hostility, resentment, and in fact, violence. And so he said to himself, I am an untouchable, and every Black person in the United States is an untouchable too. Dr. King came to the recognition of the connection between the hierarchy of India, the ancient caste system of India, and the hierarchy in the United States, because those who knew best what a caste system was instantly recognized caste when they saw it, and they connected their system of hierarchy to our own. Caste is not a word often applied to the United States. It's more connected historically to the language of India or feudal Europe, but it turns out that there were anthropologists and social scientists who went into the Jim Crow South in the 1930s and 40s at the height of its power, of that regime's power. And they actually risked their lives to go in and to study, to understand, to research, and ultimately to write about the world as it was in the Jim Crow South, risking their lives to do so. And they emerged from their research using the language of caste because they could see the connections between the caste system elsewhere and the caste hierarchy in the American South. Caste is essentially an artificial, arbitrary grade and ranking of value in a society. It's what determines one's standing, respect, benefit of the doubt, access to resources or denial of access to resources, assumptions of competence and worthiness and intelligence, whether one will be protected by the authorities or attacked by the authorities. Caste is the infrastructure of our divisions. Any number of arbitrary metrics could be used to rank people in a caste system: ethnicity, religion, lineage, language, place of origin, immigrant status. Any number of metrics could be used to divide and to rank people. In our country, the metric that the early colonists used to divide and to rank people to determine who would be slave or free, who would have rights or no rights, not even over their own bodies, who would profit from the labor extracted from others, or who would be reduced to a commodity, who could be bought, who could be sold, who could be won in a bet, or given away as a wedding present, was the metric of race. In other words, They used the otherwise neutral physical characteristics that should have no meaning other than the range of human physical manifestation. They took those characteristics and used those to assign people to an inherited role in a hierarchy before there was even a United States of America. They used these otherwise neutral physical characteristics to determine who could own property and who could be property. Slavery thus became the foundation of a hierarchy built on greed and exploitation, was succeeded by Jim Crow apartheid, and cast a shadow over the country to the current day. We alive today have the burden of having to explain to succeeding generations, how is it that some of the things that we alive today, just within the last year and a half or so, have witnessed. We saw in May of 2020, a man killed before our very eyes in real time. George Floyd, we saw what happened to him in those 9 minutes and 29 seconds, something that should not happen to any human being anywhere on the planet, much less our own country. We saw his life drained from him. We saw his humanity stripped from him. And we saw no one there to help him, no one to save him, his life drained from him before our very eyes. And over what? Over the accusation of his having presumably attempted to pass a counterfeit $20 bill. An infraction that we learned at the trial of his assailant was not even an arrestable offense. This was an infraction that was to have been responded to with a citation and a court date. George Floyd should be alive today. And then earlier this year, on January 6th, we saw another iteration of caste, another iteration of hierarchy, another iteration of the disparities in how people are treated on the basis of their location in a hierarchy, such as ours. On January 6th, we saw a mob of insurrectionists actually break in to the citadel of democracy itself. We saw a mob of insurrectionists actually rampage through Statuary Hall in the United States Capitol. We saw a mob ransack the belongings of lawmakers. We saw lawmakers forced to barricade themselves to protect themselves from the mob. We saw this mob attack police officers, and we know that half a dozen officers died as a result of that insurrection. And then we saw something else that particular day that is instructive about how caste works and how hierarchy works in a society. And that is, we saw those same people who had been in a mob that actually attacked and killed officers. We saw those same people at the end of the day walk down the steps of the Capitol with their lives, something that was denied George Floyd over the presumed accusation of attempting to pass a counterfeit $20 bill. Because not enough of us know our country's true history, far too many of us speak of slavery as a sad, dark chapter in our country's history, when in fact it is the foundation of the social, political, and economic order of our country. Slavery lasted for so long, it lasted for 246 years. That is nearly 1/4 of a millennium. That is 12 generations. How many greats do we have to add to the word grandparent to begin to conceive of how long slavery lasted on the soil? Another way of looking at it is that slavery lasted for so long, it will not be until next year, 2022, that the United States will have been a free and independent nation for as long as slavery lasted on this soil. One last statistic is that slavery lasted for so long that no adult, no teenager alive today will be alive at the point at which African Americans will have been free for as long. That will not happen until the year 2111. It will not be until the second decade of Americans will reach parity between slavery and freedom. We have not addressed, much less reconciled, what we are facing as a nation. No one was held to account for those 246 years of enslavement. No one was held to account for the rupture of secession and civil war. Instead, there are actually monuments to those men. Because we have not addressed, much less reconciled, what we are facing as a nation, we, alive today, saw a Confederate flag inside the United States Capitol. We, alive today, are burdened with having to explain to succeeding generations, how is it that a rioter in 2021 was able to deliver the Confederate flag farther than Robert E. Lee himself? What we are witnessing is the ongoing consequences of our racial caste system and its response to threats to its existence, or rather, more specifically, those who see dominance as their birthright, desperate to protect it at all costs. We saw the pictures and the videos of the United States Capitol under siege. We saw the mob's enraged and self-righteous rioters literally climbing the walls to get into the Capitol to disrupt or to assert what they perceived to be democracy in the ways that they perceived it. But later that evening, we saw a different video that gave us a different window onto the way that caste works in a society such as ours. In that video, there was that circulated. It appeared after the mob had been cleared out of the Capitol. And in this scene, there were a crew of janitors who were brought in to clean up after the rampage. They labored in their uniforms, bent over with mops and brooms and with masks over their faces. They were, to a person, all Black. There was a police officer, the only white person in the scene, a white police officer who stood surveilling them, overseeing them. He was the only one barefaced without a mask. I saw instantly the people assigned to the subordinated caste for 400 years, still consigned to their historic role of serving, cleaning up after those programmed to see themselves as dominant, superior, supreme. Had people who looked like the janitors in that crew, seen working late into the night, deigned to burst through police barricades, deigned to break into the United States Capitol? Well, we know what would have come of that. It is inconceivable. It is unthinkable. They would not have lived to tell. This is the enduring nature of hierarchy, the entitlement of those born to the historic role of dominance in one society, the entitlement to take or to assert what they perceive to be theirs. The scenes of siege in our nation's capital may have looked like another country, but it is ours. What we saw may have looked like a different century, but it is ours. This may have looked like a long ago battle over justice waged and presumably won back in another era, but it is ours still. This is the country's karmic moment of truth. Will it follow the path of darkness and division, of hate and hierarchy that have riven it for centuries? Or will it rise to what Dr. King called the heights of the majestic and live up to its creed, become and defend true democracy with liberty and justice for every single one of us? What we have seen has made it wrenchingly clear that Dr. King's mission has not been completed. It will be up to all of us, and particularly the prime beneficiaries of our country's 400-year-old social order, to make it so. Not only for our communities, our children, our country, but for the species and for the planet itself. Thank you so much for inviting me to be with you this evening, and I look forward to our conversation.
Well, I am excited. I really enjoyed that. And I tell you, I was sitting here because it's just, us talking as friends. I'm just and taking notes and whatnot. It's interesting the perspectives, how we all arrived to the table based on our experience in life. You defined caste just a moment ago, but in your book, chapter 5, the container we have built for you, I've been really looking forward to this part. So you talk about the idea of one's role in society and knowing how to respond when people have a container set up for you, their ideas on how you should flow in society. And you also wrote about being a national correspondent for the New York Times, experiencing a retailer who refused to believe that you were the reporter assigned to a story. I've been there and done that. So in the end, you wrote the piece without mentioning him. You later sent him a copy of the story and your business card. Maybe we snap to that because that's just awesome. But you said you haven't stepped foot into that retailer, and you also have not mentioned the retailer publicly. So since it's just us, would you like to do that tonight? But more seriously here, lean into why you told that story and how that all fits into Caste.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. So first of all, I included it because it was such a perfect example of the assumptions that are made on the basis literally of what we look like. I mean, that is how our caste system was created. And the way the colonists used that is that they could look at a person and know if that person was someone that was likely to be enslaved or could be enslaved or was consigned to being enslaved, or whether they were not. And so we live with the continuing assumptions, stereotypes, and location, where people can make assumptions about all of us, actually, because all of us have been assigned a location in the caste system. But I also included it because it's an example of how the lives of people who are targeted by the caste system, or people who have been assigned to the very bottom of the caste system, can be going about their day, going about their lives, and then get this disruption, can get this reminder of how the society positions people, how the society makes assumptions about people, and also to show how it can make it difficult for people who are assigned to the bottom and historically in our society, make it difficult for them to do their job. It's one of the things that can reinforce the restrictions and the lowered expectations, the assumptions of failure, the assumptions of incompetence, the assumptions that one's not going to be able to do the task. Well, there are obstructions to being able to do the task. And in this case, I was not able to actually interview someone because he assumed that I could not possibly be the national correspondent of the New York Times, even though I talked with him over the phone. And he was quite anxious to be interviewed by the Times because he said to me, I can't talk with you right now. I'm expecting the New York Times reporter to show up any minute. I have to prepare for that, and I can't talk with you. So he actually was turning away the person that he was anxiously looking forward to talk to, and didn't even realize. And so one of the reasons that I wanted to include that is to show it does harm to everybody in that interaction. It did harm to me. I had to figure out what I was going to do. I was flummoxed by it. I was disrupted as in the flow of my work. He was hurt by it in ways that he might not have recognized. In other words, to remind people that everyone is harmed by these assumptions, stereotypes, and the social construct of race, the social construct of locating people on the basis of what they look like. Because here's someone who wanted very much to be in the New York Times, very much wanted to be written about, very much wanted to be interviewed. And he missed the opportunity because he turned the person away. He turned the New York Times reporter away. And therefore, he didn't get what he very much wanted. So if you multiply this times, hundreds of thousands of transactions on a given day in a country as large as ours, then you can realize all the missed opportunities, you can realize all the missed transactions, you can realize all of the things that people are expecting and hoping might happen, and then they don't. And so everyone is hurt by that. One reason why I want to answer your question about one reason why I do not focus in on the identifying the individual or the company is because then it would be so easy for us to say, okay, I will avoid, as an ally for her, I will also avoid I will avoid this. I will do what she's doing. But that would mean that we're missing the larger point. And that is that it could happen almost anywhere. There's no single way of assuming where it may occur because it's built into the fabric of our country. It's part of the DNA, the idea of hierarchy and location and assignment of roles and expectations. And so it could happen anywhere. So by focusing in on or assuming that this one city is more racist than another city, or this business is more racist than another, or this one is more casteist, however you want to describe it, means that we're missing the larger point, which is this is embedded in the society at large. It's been in place for 400 years. And there's not by focusing on one place, we're missing the larger picture of how it affects all of us as a society.
See, you're such a much better person than I am, because I would have said, fill in the blank. And it's interesting. And while this is your time, I have to share, I was traveling recently when I started reading Caste, and I was in the airport here in Columbus. I went to take a seat next to a woman who moved her purse. It was a table in between us, moved her purse to the other side, got up, walked away, just did all this mess. We were flying the airliner where you pick your seats. So I got on and I looked for her. I sat next to her, and then I pulled out this and set it on my lap. That was an interesting experience. I promise I won't read the entire book so people can revert to it and check it out. But you do this awesome job using an analogy of a play and how we all have our roles in society. And so here on page 39, chapter 4, a long-running play, The Emergence of Caste in America. This hit me in a very emotional way. I've read this to so many people. I was reading it in the newsroom. I said, okay, everybody, listen to this. It says, over the run of the show, the cast has grown accustomed to, and that's C-A-S-T, has grown accustomed to who plays which part. For generations, everyone has known who is center stage and the lead. Everyone knows who the hero is, who the supporting characters are, who is the sidekick, good for laughs, and who is in shadow. The undifferentiated chorus with no lines to speak, no voice to sing, but necessary for the production to work. And then you go on to say, veer from the script and you will face the consequences. Veer from the script and other cast members will step in to remind you where you went off script. Do it often enough or at a critical moment and you may be fired, demoted, cast out, your character conveniently killed off in the plot. That spoke on so many levels of you may succeed, but know your role and stay in your place.
Yeah. I'm reminded of, I built up that metaphor because I was thinking about caste in the other ways that the word caste is used without an E. So I thought about, the mechanism that we put on an arm when we have broken bones, and that cast is to literally keep those broken bones in a fixed place so they cannot move. And you think about, the cast in a play where you have the stage and someone stage right, stage left, and someone in the foreground and the background, and everybody knows their lines to speak. And if you step out of turn, if you on the wrong part of the stage, if you're supposed to be in the background and you suddenly show up in the foreground, then there will be, everyone knows the script and everyone gets on board to keep everyone in the place that they've been assigned from the beginning, cast, C-A-S-T. And so I thought about that because we realize we've been seeing so many cases where Black people have been just going about their day. They're at a Starbucks waiting for a friend. They're at a park in Oakland and they're barbecuing and someone calls the police on them. And was really struck by this one case example in St. Louis where a businessman, African-American businessman, was returning home from work, and he was going into, opening the door to the lobby of his condo building. And there was a woman there, a white woman, happened to be a white woman who was there, and she blocked him from getting into the lobby of the building. She was not afraid. She was demanding to know who he was. She did not believe he lived there. She believed he was out of his place, and she was She was blocking him and demanding an explanation from him as to what he was doing when he merely was, to the lobby of his building. But she didn't let up then. She then followed him to the elevator. She got on the elevator. So it was not about fear. It was about her surveilling, her policing, her enforcing the boundaries of who should be where in society. She literally followed him all the way up the elevator to the floor and got off on the floor when he got off to continue to police the boundaries, to continue to surveil him. And he was sort of the underlying human impulse to divide and to rank and to create hierarchy. And then when you look out and you realize that there are other places that have had extreme hierarchies such as ours, and that there are so many points of intersection. I mean, the fact that I could even compile 8 different pillars of caste, each of which the United States historically has had in its history, has had in its background, has had in its infrastructure, then that means that there's something deeper, bigger, more primordial. And if we're not aware of that, then we're not going to be able to resolve this. And that's why this is important.
You know, one thing that I appreciate, and I love the opportunity to be able to participate in a program like this, because, you know, sometimes you tweet folks and they never see it or what have you. But I got to tell you, I really appreciate how you humanize the victims of the Holocaust. You told individual stories. People here in the United States, I think that's just so important, and want to make sure that that's of note. And at least, I'm sure you've heard that from other people, but I at least wanted you to hear from me. What we're going to take some questions from the audience in just a moment. But I always wonder, as a kid, what did you want to be as an adult? And then how did you navigate your way to becoming this, I like to say, caretaker of history?
Yeah. Well, my father was a Tuskegee Airman, and he, like other Tuskegee Airmen, after the war, found that he was not able to do his dream. None of them were able to find work as pilots. They were some of the most gifted pilots our country has produced, and yet when the war was over, none of them were able to actually work in their field. And so my father, all of them had to figure out a way of remaking themselves. And he went back and got a second degree and became a civil engineer. That is not, however, what I wanted to be. So to answer your question, no, that was not what I wanted to be, although he wanted very much me to be a civil engineer. Had I been anything else, it would have been an architect. And I think that's interesting because, architecture is focused on structure, and architecture involves creativity. And so that's the only thing that I might have considered doing other than what I ultimately chose to do. But to answer your question, though, I never really seriously considered anything else but what it is that I'm doing. This is all I've ever done. I've only worked or earned my keep by writing or teaching writing. That's the only thing I've ever done. And so my father, who wanted me very much to become a civil engineer or an engineer of any kind, because he thought that way I would always have work. He was pro-STEM before we called it STEM. He was very much wanting me to do that. But he did come around. He was my biggest advocate, my biggest cheerleader, my biggest fan in the end. And so I view myself, you asked me what might I become. So I didn't become an engineer as he might have wanted, but he ended up as a civil engineer, becoming literally a builder of bridges. And I feel that I have taken up that legacy, though not an actual engineer. I've taken up the legacy of trying to be a bridge between peoples, between worlds, between eras even. And so I'm literally the daughter of a builder of bridges, and that's how I incorporate what he might have wanted me to become, what I considered briefly, meaning architecture, and then what I ultimately became.
I like it. I like it. I always think it's great to hear folks' backstories. This is not, we're running up against the clock, but I'm going to ask you anyway. When you were naming some of the different events that we are experiencing and that we've gone through, the presidential campaign, pandemic, George Floyd, January 6th, here in Columbus, December 4th, Casey Goodson Jr. was shot and killed, situation with an officer. About 2.5 weeks later, another man, Casey Goodson Jr. was shot and killed by a deputy, Andre Hill by a police officer. It's tough following these stories. It's tough reporting it, turning it around. you carried a lot, you had to have carried a lot of weight when going through your research. How do you navigate that? How do you guard your mental health?
Thank you for asking that. There was a case in Central Ohio right of the day of George Floyd, actually, of the 16-year-old girl who was shot, as I'm recalling. That's
okay,
correct.
right.
That's another example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. My goal is to, what motivates me, let me put it that way, what motivates me every day is the recognition that there are ancestors of mine whose names I will never know, whose faces I could never imagine, who somehow survived the Middle Passage across the Atlantic Ocean during the transatlantic slave trade. On both sides of my family, I know that there are people whose names I will never know, faces I will never be able to imagine, who somehow survived that. I cannot even begin to conjure the suffering, the terror that they experienced. All the weeks and months that it took to make that horrific crossing, and then being ripped from their families, all that they'd ever known, and arriving in a place where they would be condemned to enslavement for multiple generations. And so that is what motivates me, not, the idea that there are people in my background, people in my ancestors. You were just mentioning about how people say it's ancient history. It's a long time ago. Why do you even speak of that? Well, African of crime against humanity, meaning that we have been deprived of even knowing, being able to create a true lineage, genealogy for ourselves. Meaning, if once you start doing genealogy, an African American quickly comes to realize the magnitude of slavery. It is not ancient history. You do not have to go back very far to hit that roadblock as you try to create a genealogy. You do not have to go far to discover or to come to grips with the immediate ancestors, family members who survived Jim Crow. You don't have to go back very far for that. And so this is very, very real. And so what animates me is the need to give honor to the suffering of those in our backgrounds and in American history, whose names may not be known and whose names actually were not even thought as necessary to be included. I mean, many of the ancestors of many current day African Americans, their ancestors are just a gender and an age on some slaveholders' ledger book, inventory of slaves. And so, to be reduced to that means that history has wiped away, erased their very existence. And so what motivates me is the need to breathe life into their experiences, to give honor to what they suffered. And to me, the greatest, disrespect would be to not give honor to them, to ignore what they went through, to look away and to pretend that it didn't happen. And I would say that I feel that if they could suffer and endure all that they went through, then surely I can take the time to research, to synthesize, to write about, and give honor to what they said. And if I could spend the time to research and to synthesize and to write about it, then surely others who did not have to go as deep into this idea, because many things didn't make it in the book. If I could spend the time to do that, then others can take the time to read about it. We need to recognize the sacrifices that were made for us to live in the country that we do.
Yeah, I talk to a lot of people who do similar research, and they say that it is just therapeutic for them, even to make sure that they honor these folks whose names we may never know. I want to get in some questions. Brace yourself with this, because our first couple of questions come from some young people. So we're going to hear first from Tylen Gordon, who's a sophomore at Columbus's Eastmoor Academy.
Hello, Mrs. Wilkerson. My name is Tylen Isaiah Gordon, and I'm a sophomore at Eastmoor Academy. My questions for you are, do you think we're making progress? And what gives you hope for the future? Thank you.
Is there a way that
we are making progress? What gives you hope for the future?
What was that?
Oh, I was just repeating the question. Do you think we are making progress? What gives you hope for the future?
I feel that we are, on the potentially the cusp of making progress. But we have had moments of great progress in the past. You think about Reconstruction. You think about the civil rights era, where we had legislation that was put in place, presumably to outlaw the embedded, codified injustices and inequalities in this country. And then you realize that people might have assumed that was written in granite and that it could never be that we had turned a corner, never to have to look back again. And then we turn around and realize that, for example, the Voting Rights Act has been under siege over the last 6 or 7 years, that efforts to make it more difficult for some people to vote, which these are laws and procedures that are not in keeping with the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And so there, it's a very mixed picture that we are facing right now. What gives me hope is the fact that the global response to what happened to George Floyd. There were protests in all 50 states, even in places where there's a very, very small percentage of people of African descent. There were protests all over the world. It was something that provoked the outrage of people around the world. Again, this is something that should not happen to anyone on the planet, much less our own country. And so it's the response to situations like that do give me hope. But I must say that our country I think of our country as being like a patient, and a lot of times if you have a condition, if you have a virus, if you have bacterial virus, for example, the doctor will often give you antibiotics. That's the course of treatment. And so what a person will do is they'll start taking the antibiotics, they start feeling better. And then they say to themselves, I'm feeling better after the first 3 or 4 days. I don't need to take it for a whole 12 days. And they might stop. And meaning they get comfortable, they get overconfident. They start to feel like all of it's been taken care of. I'm done. It's done. I don't have to think about it anymore. And that is actually the most perilous moment, because what you've done is you've gone a certain point in the process of healing, and then you pull back at the precise moment when you need to be pushing forward. And if you have a relapse, it could actually be worse than the original, whatever you had originally. And so that's where so it's really truly is a mixed picture, and I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that that with each individual, each classroom, each city, each community, each segment of our society that awakens to what we have experienced, awakens to our history, and begins to connect the dots. That yes, that is very hopeful. The goal would be to bring as many people along to an awareness of how we got to where we are.
I think someone said, keep hope alive. You always got to have hope. We have another question. Let's head over to the campus of Capital University.
Hi, my name is Cindy Crothers. I'm a current student at Capital University. My question for you is, what are some of the steps that young people can take towards dismantling the caste system?
Well, I want to preface this by saying that when I wrote this book, I specifically indicated that I'm presenting myself as kind of the building inspector. I am rendering a report on the house that we collectively have inherited. You don't want to go in the basement after rain, but if you don't go in the basement, it's at your own peril. Whatever is there is going to be lurking and waiting for you, whether you choose to look or not. And so that was how I presented this. And part of the issue is it's a disservice to our country, actually. If I were to present myself as having all the answers, if anyone says they have all the answers and they're not telling you the truth, this has been 400 years in the making. This has been so embedded into our society that without even saying anything, without even having to teach it anymore, without anybody having to tell you anything, we all have encoded into ourselves a sense of, who belongs where in society, what is to be expected of any individual that we might meet. And so it's a massive, massive, massive challenge that we're facing, and it will take absolutely everyone. In the meantime, and also I should say that it requires inspection of and overhaul of every single sphere of our society, because this is every aspect of our society has been imprinted with this history. Even things that might seem innocuous. I was just mentioning earlier about how in photography in our country, or photography in the world, actually was created with people in the dominant caste in mind. There was an individual, a woman was used as the measure of what a photograph should be. To calibrate film, they used a woman model, happened to be a white woman with auburn hair, and that if the film captured her accurately, then that was the film that was going to be used for everyone. And what that meant is that many people were not going to be photographed correctly, because the photograph was calibrated for someone who did not look like many people. And so that's one of the many examples. So every sphere of our society deserves and warrants inspection, because we are living with the inequities that set up one group for a kind of improved circumstance through no fault of their own or actions on their own, and for others in the disfavored group, a less well-off outcome. But what we can do in the meantime is that I believe that we have a responsibility to learn as much as we can about our country's history. We have a responsibility to learn as much as we can about how we got to where we are. We have a responsibility to recognize that this is a social construct. It is not real. All of the divisions that we have been seemingly codified and written in stone are merely creations of human beings that only go back for 400 or 500 years. All of the designations that we use that indicate this kind of person should be this way and that kind of person should be that way, all of this is a creation of human beings. And if it can be made by human beings, it can be dismantled by human beings. In the meantime, I think it recalls upon us to recognize our common humanity, to thwart and recognize when we our own programming, to not present ourselves as being somehow immune to this. We all have been exposed to programming. We all need to recognize that in some ways, caste is best recognized not between groups, but within groups, because there are ways in which our society has been created that sets up one group, those at the very, very, very top of the hierarchy, actually would have no reason to actually even be interacting with people who are at the very, very bottom of our society. And that some of the greatest tensions in a caste system, which is by definition foments division, that many of those divisions are happening between and among groups that are not at the very top. And that's tremendously toxic, tremendously damaging to everyone. There's this idea known as white adjacency, in which a caste system instructs people or rewards people for presenting themselves in such a way as to adhere to the expectations of those who have been born to the dominating group in our society. And so this requires, it requires the country to, I believe that we should have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission that would illuminate and lay bare that which we have inherited, in the same way that when you take possession of an old house, you get the inspection report, and it's then on your responsibility to fix, repair, overhaul, or do whatever is necessary to make sure that building is sound and can is repaired for future generations, overhaul, whatever it may take. And so I think that's what we're called upon to do. And in the meantime, recognizing the ways in which we have individually been programmed, I would say even damaged by the infrastructure and the programming that we've all been exposed to.
We have just about 3 minutes left. We could do this all night. This is so very, very informative. I know you agree. Jim Wilson of Columbus, he asked in part, he asked about research, but you touched on that. But he also wants to know, is there anything you will recommend for white people in terms of racial reconciliation?
We need more than allies. We need people on the front lines with us. I think marginalized people need more than allies. Marginalized people need individuals who will roll up their sleeves and recognize what needs to happen to make this a fairer, more just society. That's one thing. But I also think that people, born to the dominant group in our society, again, through no actions on their own. I mean, this is not what anyone asks for. It's what is bequeathed to individuals based upon the prevailing metric that was used by the colonists and that we've all inherited. But there's the challenge is that progress requires involvement of everyone in the society, every single group, and particularly those who've been born to the dominant group in our society. And that means that there's a unique responsibility that is held by those in the dominant group. And one of the responsibilities, I think, is to use the entitlement, the influence that is uniquely the preserve of those who are in the dominant group, meaning to have influence over others in one's own group. People in the dominant group, the dominant caste, can have a much greater influence over the thought processes, over the policies, over the behaviors, presumably, of those who are in their same group. People who are in one group are more likely to listen to, hear, to be persuaded by someone who is more like them. And that is the unique responsibility and role. That's one out of many, many things that people can do. But that's one of the things that can be done is to be the individual who first does the research themselves. I mean, a lot of times I hear from parents who would say, how can I raise my children to be more egalitarian? How can I raise them that way? But I would go back to that, the instructions when we are on the plane, and they say to us that, if in case of emergency, you put the mask on yourself and then on those who are and on you, on the children or anyone else dependent upon you. Meaning before anyone can train their children, teach their children how to be more egalitarian, more open-minded, more humanistic, to know our country's history, it means that parents have to first do the work themselves. The parents have to learn the country's history first before they can impart to their children. We need to do self-inspection before we can impart something to anyone else. So there's the self-inspection, introspection. There is the recalibrating of how we see ourselves vis-a-vis other members of our species, recognizing that we are all interconnected. And then there's making use of the unique influence that an individual has if they are in the dominant group to be able to influence those who are within that group. It is something that is imperative. because we are not on the same page about how we got to where we are in this country. And we have a lot of work to do in order to get on the same page.
I want to wrap with this on page 164. You know, and I have mixed feelings on how I feel about this, and it was just brought up, this was a mix of emotions for me. But you talk about in 1944, America was fighting in World War II, and the public school district in Columbus, Ohio, we all know where that is, had an essay contest. And the question posed was what to do with Hitler after the war. And a 16-year-old girl, she won the essay contest with a single sentence. Do you have that sentence?
Yes. Put him in a black skin and make him live the rest of his life in America.
One sentence, and it encapsulates so much. It's so poignant. It's so rich. And I love learning new things. But there was a part of me that was a bit embarrassed because growing up here in Columbus, I did not know that story. Isabel Wilkerson, thank you so much for joining us. This has been very enlightening. I hope that as informative as it's been and as much as you were able to pour into us, I hope you had a good time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Sure thing. I have some housekeeping things I have to take care of here. So on behalf of the New Albany Community Foundation and NBC4, I want to thank you all for tuning in tonight. I hope you all were able to take a lot away from this program. We touched on a lot of topics. I was hoping we could get some more questions in, but I was jotting down notes. She was fabulous. I also want to tell you the New Albany Community Foundation would like to invite you back for the next lecture, which it hopes to have in person at the McCoy Community Center for the Arts in New Albany. That's on February 10th. The featured speaker will be Wombat. So keep in touch and stay tuned for sure. Stay in touch at the foundation's website to learn more about this program as well as the rest of the season. And with that, we thank you all for joining us tonight. The season, it is underway. I'll see you tonight for NBC4 at 11.